There's so many people that have come up to me at conferences, over the years and been like, I was about to give up on PHP or maybe even just programming in general, but Laravel sort of kept me in it and sort of reinvigorated my career or even given me a career. I have people come up to me and say, I used to be in sales, or I used to do this, and now I learned Laravel from Laracast, and I have a full-time job as a programmer. So it's been a really crazy ride, honestly, and a pretty rewarding experience building the whole thing.
Did you clear your cash flow?
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. I have a really special episode lined up for you today. The guest is Taylor Otwell, the creator of Laravel. And for those of you that follow me, you probably know that I'm the CEO of Curotech, a software development services company. And Laravel is our framework of choice for backend development. We highly specialize in the technology, and it's really exciting for me today to have Taylor on for that reason. Taylor's totally overhauled the PHP ecosystem, and he's quite a personality in the space. We get into all sorts of topics today. We talk about the origin stories of Laravel. We talk about PHP and how the community's evolved over the last decade or so. We also get into going all the way back to the 70s and 80s, some of the early founders like Richard Stallman of the open source and free software movement and how they paved the way for open source technologies like Laravel in the modern era. So stay tuned, listen to the whole episode. We get into a lot of those really interesting topics in the second half. So stick with it and listen all the way through, and I hope you enjoy. So I think, if we're going to dive right in, which is how I tend to do these things, I think AI is probably where the listeners want to really, kind of talk about here. It's came on, obviously this like AI, ML stuff, like developers have been working on it for a decade now, Google with TensorFlow, and then there's, a lot of these other LLMs that are being built alongside TensorFlow. But, there's a huge media push, like with ChatGPT and OpenAI releasing these consumer level products over the last 6 to 12 months. It's really getting just a ton of user adoption, a ton of media play. And I think a lot of developers are starting to wonder, like, all right, so what does this mean? Like, are we going to 10x ourselves, or is there going to be like a commoditization of developer jobs? Are frameworks going to be implementing AI at the framework level? I would love to just kind of riff on that with you. What have you been seeing? Like for Laravel in particular, I'm curious, like what's the kind of like vision for how this might play into the Laravel framework?
Some of the early exploration that I've seen in the Laravel community revolves around like debugging. Like I know Marcel at Beyond Code and Frake at Spotsy have sort of experimented with AI-powered debugging in Laravel so that, if you get an exception message in your application, AI can offer like intelligent solutions to that exception message in various ways. So improving the sort of debugging workflow. I've also seen people experiment with like AI-powered database querying. I'm not sure if that's quite as robust or like fast enough for actual real-world usage at this point. But it's certainly an interesting thing to just be able to type in sort of a fluent English sentence query into a text box in like an admin panel and get some results back. So that's another way I've seen people kind of kicking the tires on AI. And then, of course, I mean, lots of Laravel developers are already sort of using AI if you're using GitHub CoPilot and things like that. So that's some of the early stuff I've seen. I've also, seen people experimenting with sort of project scaffolding based on AI. So I'm building this type of Laravel project. Maybe it's an invoicing app, and generating the sort of right kinds of models and migrations and controllers that type of application might have.
That's kind of what I was thinking about it when I was brainstorming. Like, imagine if there's something like a ChatGPT interface version of Artisan where you're kind of like telling it, all right, this is the project, these are the entities, these are the relationships between the entities. And then, maybe it like starts with writing test cases or starts with kind of like the scaffolding of the project and then runs the project. I don't know, like maybe it's not necessarily maybe like the AI part isn't baked right into the framework, but maybe it's like baked into the tools, like the command line interfaces or the kind of tools around the framework that makes the framework, easy to work with. That was kind of my initial thought. And you brought it up when you mentioned kind of like the bug squashing piece of it. I wonder if there's a way that you could, somebody could build a, like a AI that just parses your code and understands it and then writes your test cases for you.
Yeah.
That would just kind of know like what the possible weird exceptions could be.
Yeah. I think that would be interesting. And, I've seen people experimenting with AI and tests, and I've wondered myself, like, there's lots of wrong ways to get a test to pass, like, if I want to verify, like when a user deletes their account and I want to verify that the user is not in the database anymore, like one way to make that test pass is just to delete the entire user's table. But that's really the wrong way to make it pass. It's not actually the correct behavior for the system. So, as long as the AI, like I think as the AI gets smarter and actually understands the application, because like sometimes AI will give you like confidently wrong answers at this point, like ChatGPT. So you kind of have to like go back and double check it. But we'll see how that evolves, over the coming years.
There's like the famous, example for AI of how AI can go wrong. I think this is maybe like a decade old example, but it's the paperclip example. I think a lot of people know it, where, somewhere in the future, there's all this AI and a paperclip manufacturer CEO goes to, AI and says, hey, we need to produce and sell more paperclips. Go figure out how to produce and sell more paperclips. And then, I'll probably botch this, but like many permutations in, all of a sudden the AI is like melting down cars and buildings. And, now we've got like more paperclips than we're ever going to use in humanity. Right. Which is to your point, like, if you ask AI to go pass a test case, it might, technically pass the test case by deleting the entire users table. That might be one way to just get the quickest, result of the test, passing that individual test. Yeah, it's funny how like, you have to really think about like the prompts you give and what possible like side effects that could have from it. But the test case thing, kind of like an AI powered artisan tool. That was like the first thing that I would think of that comes to my head for this implementation of AI in the framework. What do you? I know I've seen a lot of developers, especially new developers that are kind of new to the profession, get really nervous about AI. Like, is it going to replace my job? Is this industry going to change? Fast. I just showed up in the industry and it's like already, being flipped upside down. Really seasoned developers that have been around for a decade or two don't seem to have that fear. Yeah. But what would you say to these early stage, like developers that might be 1 or 2 years into their career? What would you say to them about this?
I myself, as you said, I think a lot of developers that have been around a while don't necessarily have this fear. And I can't say that I totally have that fear, because I sort of view all these things as like just an augmentation, to the developer. So, like say in the same way, like a calculator, like, greatly augmented our ability to quickly do math. I think ChatGPT is sort of the same kind of thing. Like, it solves a certain class of problems so well that you would like never do them by hand anymore. Like, just writing a few paragraphs or writing an email in a certain way or about a certain topic, or even writing a blog post, or looking up certain kinds of information. It makes you so much more productive in those scenarios. But, at this point, with what I've seen, I don't have a big fear of it just like totally making developers irrelevant. I don't think it's not at the point where it's building non-trivial applications based on simple user input. It's not building Laravel Forge off some prompts. But I think it's just like a really powerful tool to enhance developer productivity, using things like GitHub CoPilot, or even just like I've used ChatGPT just to write like a regular expression before, describing to it the kind of regular expression I want, the kinds of things that should pass the regular expression, the kinds of things that shouldn't pass the regular expression. And, it kind of spits out something and I just kind of like verify it and go from there. And that saves me a lot of time. Honestly, I honestly use it as just like a much better Google in many ways, a very like context aware Google. So we'll see. I think there's certain kinds of programmer activities that it could commoditize, but I think some of those things were already sort of being productized or whatever, like, simple landing pages or simple marketing pages. I think AI can build those kinds of things now, but we already sort of had no code tools to build those sorts of things. So like, that's not really a huge change in the ecosystem. You already didn't have to write any code to build that kind of thing. So I don't really see that as a huge step forward. It is really cool. And it's sort of like a stepping stone to something more advanced, but it's not necessarily something we didn't have before.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I thought about this. And if you look at the landscape of software, there's like such a backlog of software that still needs to be built. I think there's like multiple decades of software. We've already hit like all the category top level things. Like we've got, all the things like the SAP and the Salesforce and, like all the, like the AWSs and like all these top level category platforms. But there's so many niches now to go into, like, CRM for a specific vertical or a integration layer for a specific type of warehouse, or like there's so many different niches out there now that there's like a multi-decade backlog of software development opportunities in the market.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Like, I mean, I go into businesses, fairly large businesses around here, and they're still using like green screen, like terminals, you know what I mean? Like, so yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all if there's that big of a backlog.
That's cool. Yeah. So I was actually, I don't know if you've ever heard of Hypercontext. They're a SaaS company out of Toronto, I think. And they build all in Laravel. They just launched a new product that's I was talking with the CTO Graham the other day. They just launched a new product which is basically like it's not interviews, job performance reports, or like kind of like employee reviews essentially. And they're integrating open AI, I think GPT-4 and definitely GPT-3 APIs into their Laravel application to essentially, like, you input some data about the employee review and then the employee does the same, I think, about the company. And then it essentially like writes all the content for you.
Yeah.
And it's not like, they're not pitching it as like an AI platform or an AI product. They're pitching it as a product that helps you write reviews faster. Yeah. And I think that's the key. Like, if you go around trying to pitch like AI as your product, then you're trying to like fit, that was the whole Web3 and like metaverse thing. Like, everyone's trying to build businesses around this Web3 concept that I think is kind of fizzled out. Whereas like, if you use AI to create features that enhance the product experience and just make the product experience really badass, that's the right way to use AI, not using it as like a hype vehicle to make your product pitch sound better or to try to sound like you're cutting edge. I want to take a quick break from the episode and say, if you're enjoying this content, the best way you can say thank you is to subscribe. So if you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. And if you're on one of the podcast platforms, hit the subscribe button there as well. And also share it out to your friends and colleagues. If you find this content useful and you think other people will enjoy it as well, please send it out. And back to the episode.
My background, when I had first started writing Laravel, I got hired by Ian at Userscape, Ian Landsman, to build helpdesk software. And I've chatted with him about AI. And, I think helpdesk and customer support is actually one of the more obvious areas where AI could really make a huge difference. Like, for us at Laravel, support is like a big overhead for us, because we have technical products like Forge and Vapor and Envoyer. The customer support needs are sometimes complicated. It's not just like, hey, I need a refund, or hey, what does this do? It's like, hey, my server is not responding in this particular scenario, and we have to sort of SSH into the server, figure out if there's something wrong with the server, get back to the customer. It's a really kind of ordeal. And if AI could like analyze, all of our previous help desk conversations, as well as other information about server infrastructure, in general, and offer us up like, hey, here's kind of what I think you should respond with in this scenario, like that would save us, I mean, potentially hours a day. Like that would be such a huge productivity boost for us. And I think I know that help desk companies, including Ian's, are already working on integrating AI into their product. And kind of like the scenario you mentioned, it's not like AI is not really the product, but it's sort of being brought into this existing type of software to really like deliver a massive productivity boost potentially.
Absolutely.
And that could lead, like you were saying, people fearing I guess their job. I mean, if you can save tons of hours by introducing AI in that way, like not at Laravel, but maybe at bigger companies, maybe you go from needing 30 support agents to just 20, so I don't know, maybe AI does affect the job market in that sense. We'll see.
I mean, we've already implemented it into 3 products we're building, all Laravel products for different clients. And, it definitely, like, it's, what exactly what we're doing is saving man hours for the company and improving the accuracy of things that were, formerly done through manual efforts. And it's interesting because, like, one of the things we're doing, anytime we deploy AI into a new use case for a client, we'll actually run sort of like a 3-part study for a certain period of time where when a decision needs to be made, we'll have 2 humans that, formerly it would just be 1 human making a decision. We'll have 2 humans make the decision and 1 AI make the decision. Like, we'll build some algorithm and then run it through like a prompt engineering and run it through a decision, like hit the API, make a decision, get a response back, parse the response. And we'll compare the 2 humans. First, did they agree? Did the 2 humans agree that this is the right, did they come up with the same answer? And then did the AI come up with the same answer? And we're finding through these studies that not only, obviously it's faster to do the AI than the humans, because the humans have to go into a queue, the AI would do it real time. But we're finding generally speaking, higher accuracy on the AI side, because, like, for instance, one of the clients we did this for has this huge, I don't want to get too specific because I don't know if they'd give permission to share this, but they have a huge, like, database of organizations around the country, thousands of organizations, and their process is to match individuals with the right organization. And, before they did this manually, but what person could possibly understand the entire landscape of all these thousands of organizations and all of their unique attributes to be able to then understand the individual person that's coming in and what unique attributes of that person match the unique attributes of the right organization. But we can do that at scale with a properly fine-tuned LLM that is specifically fitted to the use case of that specific business need. And so we had that story that we implemented that for that client, and we're starting to kind of like reproduce the same sort of concepts for other clients. And it's like, anytime we walk in the room with a client, start talking about this stuff, they're all just instantly interested. It's they're getting into the sales process really fast, and they just really, it's like people at companies, leaders at businesses are really excited to see how they can, not only stay innovative in their industry, but potentially create disruption in their industry.
Yeah, for sure. It's a big deal. That's why it's always hard, like I was kind of reminded when you said Web3, it's like this AI thing. People have sort of been like, is this the new, is this just 2023's Web3? You know what I mean? Is this sort of like a fad? And I don't really think so. Like, I actually think it is like a massive boost in productivity in certain areas. And I've even enjoyed it myself. So, it's really cool to hear that, it's being used in Laravel applications already to sort of deliver value.
Yeah, I mean, I was scratching my head the whole time through that Web3 metaverse thing. I'm like, man, like, this is really getting picked up. There's like VC money sloshing around on this, but I didn't get it. And I was like, I can't, invest in this because I just don't get it. Now, I've been wrong before. I had a friend that was trying to convince me to mine Bitcoin in 2011 and 2012. And I was like, man, I just don't get it. So I missed that boat there, but
yeah. But I mean, it's immediately obvious why AI is useful. I mean, you could just
Yeah.
demonstrate it to someone at your desk in 10 seconds and they'll be impressed. It's not immediate. It wasn't immediately obvious why an NFT is useful, and it still isn't immediately obvious. So I do, I think there's a pretty big difference between the two. So
I personally think this is like as big of a platform of revolution as mobile and as the
yeah,
internet, as a whole.
yeah, I could see that. I was thinking similar. I was trying to thinking along a similar thought train the other day, and I kind of like viewed it as like, similar, I guess, yeah, to like a mobile phone or like Wikipedia, or some sort of massive resource that's immensely popular or widespread popular. And I think like if Siri is ever at the level of like something like ChatGPT, that would be, that would really make it super mainstream. For like, my parents are using AI, on an everyday basis. So I'm interested to see like how Google and Apple bring AI to like the typical consumer, that's not necessarily tech forward like me or you might be.
I've thought about this a lot. Like, why Google owns all the data. Why are they not leading the charge on this? And
Mm-hmm.
and it's almost like publicly they kind of look like they're fumbling the ball a little bit on it.
Mm-hmm.
And the only conclusion I can come to, like they invented TensorFlow, literally the underlying, algorithm, the underlying like technology that OpenAI is built on. Google invented and open sourced back in like 2010 or something like that. I forget the exact year. So why? I guess that's the question. So the only conclusion I can come to about it is that their legal teams know that the regulations are going to come down like a hurricane at some point on AI. And they don't want to be they don't want to be first because they don't want to get, they're already like at jeopardy of being like antitrust, monopoly, getting split up. So I think they're trying to not be first in the regulation storm that will come. And OpenAI, like, they're a nonprofit, or they might have pivoted, I guess, into a for-profit corporation. But it seems like they're kind of so far ahead that they're going to be the ones that get made the example of, and kind of like regulations get built around them, and then everyone else can kind of come in second and just like play by the rules at that point.
Yeah, it's like they have to be working on it, surely. With Apple's case, I wonder if it's sort of a situation where Siri has historically been very like privacy focused. So a lot of the processing happens on your device. And I wonder if that's sort of a bottleneck for them at this point in terms of really improving Siri to be something more like ChatGPT that requires quite a bit of processing power. But, who knows? Maybe they are, kind of waiting to see where things land with OpenAI and how things shake out.
I think that's the only possibility. But Apple's a different case. Siri's voice to text is terrible.
Right.
And Google's is really good. And actually, Whisper is another product that just spun out of OpenAI that's really good. And I was actually thinking about wrapping up Whisper into an Elixir app to basically like run, just to have like a voice to text input tool on Mac, so that I could just like hit a hotkey and just talk into my mic and just have text come out as fast as I talk. Yeah. And I thought about doing it. I even ran some Google ads to test it to see if there was a market for it. But I think it's just going to be too quickly stomped once Apple does get their acts together on Siri. But yeah, I'm surprised at how bad. And I think it's for the reason you just said. It's like they're keeping everything localized on the device for privacy. I think that's the only reason why Siri's features are not nearly as good as Google's.
Right. Yeah.
But well, changing gears here, you brought up Ian. I was actually talking to Eric Barnes about this, I think a couple of months ago, about like sort of like the origin stories of you and Ian and Laravel. And I'm sure you've told this story a million times, but if you want to do like an abbreviated version of like the origin stories of Laravel, like where the idea came to start it, how it evolved over the years, and then even like today, like what products do you have in the ecosystem? What's like sort of the nuances of those products, and just kind of walk the listeners through the history of Laravel.
Yeah, so I first started building it in 2011 as a side project. And my day job, I was actually a .NET developer, .NET and COBOL. And I only started doing PHP on the side just because I knew it was easy to throw up on the web, just like any host had PHP support. Um, I started tinkering with like CodeIgniter and some of the other PHP frameworks back then, and I liked them, but I wanted to bring in some of the features I was used to in .NET, like my dependency injection container, the templating system. I wanted like a better ORM that was more akin to like Ruby on Rails. So I started building all that in really late 2010. Actually, I started building all that, and then I released it the summer of 2011. And in that time, like I rewrote it several times over those 6 to 8 months. Um, and then, like 6 months later, so like the end of 2011, I got an email from Ian Lansman at Userscape saying, "Hey, we build help desk software in PHP. We're thinking about rewriting some things, or building new things." And I checked out Laravel, and it seems really cool. I'd like to know if you want to come on board and work on it. Which is crazy looking back because Laravel was just like 6 months old. And back then there were a lot of PHP frameworks. There's a new PHP framework every few months, it felt like, unlike today where things have been sort of like stable for years. Anyway, I accepted that offer, and Eric Barnes got hired at the same place around the same time. And he was sort of known in the CodeIgniter community a little bit. And then it just sort of went from there. Like I worked on Laravel at Userscape pretty much full time for the first 6 months to get it ready for what we needed to build. And then we built a new customer support platform that eventually was sold to another company. And we did other work, at Userscape as well. And then in 2014, I built a product called Laravel Forge, which is sort of like a server provisioning tool for building Laravel ready servers on AWS or DigitalOcean or Vultr or other cloud providers. And it basically builds out the servers, installs everything, and then you can push to deploy your application out onto these servers. And since then, that business took off pretty quickly and allowed me to go full time on Laravel in 2015. And since then, we've built 4 or 5 other products, Vapor, which is our serverless deployment tool, Envoyer, which does sort of zero downtime deployments, Spark, sort of our SaaS boilerplate toolkit thing. That's sort of a one-time purchase, not a subscription. And then we have a Nova, our admin panel, which is also a one-time purchase. And all of those products thankfully have done pretty well and allowed us to build sort of a sustainable company around this open source framework, which is kind of a rare thing to be able to accomplish. Sustainability in open source is sort of like a big topic, and it's rare that an open source product is able to sustain itself in this way. So I'm glad we were able to figure out some way to make it work. So it's been really, honestly, just a crazy adventure building this thing. And we're continuing to build new things. We have new things coming down the pipeline that I plan to release at Laracon this summer, our annual conference. And just when I think I'm out of ideas for Laravel, new ones seem to pop up. So we just keep on going.
I mean, it's quite impressive. The PHP ecosystem was definitely kind of on the rocks around the time when you came in with Laravel, and it's totally different now. Like the landscape of PHP is very, very different. And obviously there's mega frameworks like WordPress that are built on PHP, but I think like getting into like true application development frameworks, Laravel is obviously the biggest gorilla in the space at this point. And a lot of people say that you're kind of the person that turned it around, that like brought PHP back onto the map as like a real respectable, language to build applications.
Yeah. I mean, it's flattering when people say that. I think I agree that Laravel contributed. I think other things contributed as well. Things like Composer. It was sort of like Laravel was sort of at the right place at the right time, in a sense, in PHP's history. PHP 5.3 had, this is kind of getting in the nitty gritty details of PHP, but PHP 5.3 had just released not too long before Laravel came out. And with that release came some really key features that made Laravel sort of Laravel. One of the big ones was anonymous functions, like the ability to say route : get, and then pass like function to that call as like an anonymous callback handler for the route. That wasn't even possible like before PHP 5.3. You couldn't do anything like that. Also, namespaces were in PHP 5.3, and a sort of technical feature called late static binding, which is really what made something like Eloquent possible as well. So it was like those features landed, and no big framework had really been written to take advantage of those features in sort of an exclusive way. And Laravel dropped like soon after that, and it was PHP 5.3 only. It utilized all these new features of PHP. I think it also just had sort of a different vibe than the other frameworks, which felt a little bit more like verbose, enterprisey, a little bit more like Java or like C# than Rails, for example. So Laravel came out with very like expressive syntax, sort of like very fluent English style syntax that was memorable. And yeah, I think it just kind of struck a chord. A lot of people in PHP at the time were sort of abandoning ship for either Node or Rails or Python or whatever else.
I remember Rails was so big back then, like back in like 2011, 2012, like everyone I knew that was building apps or startups was doing it on Rails.
Yeah. And that's why it's kind of like, it's funny to me, people still say like PHP is sort of a dying thing, but like people were saying that when I released Laravel in 2011, like it's honestly the exact same. Like people were already saying that and sort of jumping ship. But
they had good arguments back then, though. Like,
yeah.
The Python and the JavaScript people had good arguments, but now I don't think they have. Their arguments don't hold water anymore.
No, I mean, for full stack application development, those environments are sort of worse, like than PHP. The tooling is not as fleshed out. The frameworks are not as fleshed out. The supporting libraries, the whole cohesive ecosystem doesn't really exist like it does in Laravel or like it does in Rails. And there's so many people that have come up to me at conferences over the years and been like, I was about to give up on PHP or maybe even just programming in general, but Laravel sort of kept me in it and sort of reinvigorated my career, or even given me a career. I have people come up to me and say, I used to be in sales, or I used to do this, and now I learned Laravel from Laracast, and I have a full-time job as a programmer. So it's been a really crazy ride, honestly, and a pretty rewarding experience building the whole thing.
I mean, the other thing too that really impresses me about the Laravel ecosystem, there's no other ecosystem that's like got as loyal fans, as the Laravel ecosystem. Like when you launch a new version, it's like Steve Jobs is coming out to like launch the new iPhone, and the Twitterverse, and just like the amount of like, it's like, Christmas, like everyone's just getting presents when new Laravel versions come out. And I can't think of a single other ecosystem that's like that.
Yeah, it's been pretty cool. And I don't know if it's just like, over Laravel's history, there's sort of been this running game of like, what secret thing, is Laravel working on? And I think that was sort of infectious in a way to where other people started doing similar things, cooking up little side projects or teasing new things they were working on. And it sort of like spread throughout the whole community to kind of create this sort of hype, fun community that's always kind of experimenting and trying cool new things in ways you don't see really in other PHP ecosystems.
Yeah. I mean, you play the Twitter game well. I think a lot of a lot of like open source guys are just heads down on code and just like releasing features to GitHub, and like you're a personality in the community. So I think that's a big part of it too. Yeah, I think so. Cool. So what's the business like? What does your business look like? How many people? I think you mentioned like your 4 core products. What is like a day in the life look like for what you do?
We've got 8 people now. So we've got kind of a couple people that mainly focus on Forge. We got a couple people that mainly focus on Vapor. We've got someone that mainly focuses on Nova. We kind of float around on Spark and Envoyer. They don't require as much attention as some of the other larger products, but we all work remotely. We're all spread out around the world. So we're mainly interacting in Slack and GitHub, and we use Basecamp a little bit to sort of manage what people are working on and daily check-ins. But honestly, it's a pretty laid back work environment. Sometimes I worried I'm a little too laid back as a boss, but we're all just working on various things. And then I take feedback from the employees, like, what do you think we should work on next? And they pitch ideas. We have a little pitch board in a base camp where you can write up, ideas you might have, or sort of needs you may have observed in the ecosystem, or gaps we could fill. And a lot of stuff has been built that way. Like, for example, Jessica Archer, she's one of our team members in Australia. The idea that she's sort of finishing up right now that we'll demo at Laracon, that was sort of like entirely her idea. It wasn't my idea at all. I just sort of said, yep, that sounds like a good idea. Why don't you work on that? And that happens a lot, honestly. And then sometimes I'll have an idea and pull someone into it. Like right now, or for the last, really probably like the last month or so, Nuno and I have been working on something that was kind of my brainchild earlier this year. So we just kind of work on what's exciting to us at the time and what we think makes sense for the community, or maybe what we need ourselves, kind of scratching our own itch, which is what we've done a lot over the years, just building
That's
our
so
products.
Good, man. Scratching our itch, I think, is the best way to build a business.
Yeah. So pretty much everything we've built has been for that reason.
What's what's like, how do you carve up your day? Like what is your time? What's like a day in the life of Taylor look like typically?
So I work pretty typical hours. Like I usually get into the office about 8 or 8:30, and I spend about the first like hour just catching up on customer support requests, which I usually handle, like any like sensitive cases, refunds, complicated situations. I handle those. And then I'll spend probably like an hour on GitHub just catching up with pull requests, because really to this day, I'm the only one that merges any pull requests across the whole Laravel ecosystem. So any pull request that comes into the framework, to Passport, to Socialite, to Cashier, any of our open source stuff, I'm really the one that has to click the merge button on that. And we still get quite a few every day. So I would imagine we get like 10 to 15 pull requests a day. So it's something you definitely have to stay on top of pretty much on a daily basis, or after 1 week, you've got, almost 100 open pull requests across the ecosystem. So I'll spend like an hour a day, maybe even 2 hours a day working on that if it's pretty busy. And then I'm sort of free, to either review whatever the team has been working on, if they have something they need me to kind of sign off on, or just working on whatever little interesting project I'm tinkering on at the time. So like I said, for the past few months, I've been teaming up with Nuno, working on some secret stuff for Laracon. I've also been working on just like refining and slimming down the Laravel skeleton application a little bit. So just whatever I'm kind of interested in at the time, I'll sort of hack on that the rest of the day.
Cool. I'm excited. I'll be there at Laracon in Nashville this year. I'm excited
Nice.
to see what it is. First conference IRL for a while.
Yeah, for sure. First Laracon US in 4 years. So
wow.
It doesn't feel that long, but it's crazy. I'm excited to be back with everyone. I think it's going to be an awesome conference this year. Good venue, good city, so it should be fun.
Yeah, for sure. So I've heard you say on other podcasts before that like you don't want to lose touch with the code, and that's really like where your passion is and what you love doing. And you don't really see it like trying to grow this like big, like 8 or 9 or whatever 10-figure tech enterprise at the executive level, but you really like staying close to the code and close to the framework. Is that still kind of where you're at today?
Yeah, I think so. If I wanted to grow to that level, I think I would probably, need to bring on like a CEO or something, and I would kind of function in more of a CTO role, just to stay close to the code and kind of what we're doing there. But yeah, I still code every day, for sure. Every day I'm in some sort of, I've got an editor open and I'm working on some sort of code, whether that's someone else's code, massaging like a PR someone to send on GitHub, or something I'm writing myself. I still code every day, pretty much.
It's like, I would say like probably the closest thing, like if you went that route, would be like an automatic. Matt Mullenweg of WordPress, I think he's kind of like you, where he's like an engineer and he's still like a creator, and he doesn't see himself as like the business guy, but more, at least what I know of him, like he sees himself more as like that creator, inventor kind of personality. And then he just put together a big team of executives to build this like big, I think they're probably, if they're not $1 billion in revenue, they're probably on their way to it. Just kind of like this big enterprise business around the WordPress ecosystem. I suppose you could do the same thing with Laravel over time, but it's like, is that the direction you'd want to go with it?
I can't say I'm like necessarily opposed to it. It's just like we've sort of carved out a pretty good groove here at Laravel with the people we have, and sort of it's created this nice sort of like relaxing life for me where things are going well, life is good, we're not super stressed, we build what we're interested in, and so there's not a lot of like pressure to do that, you know what I mean? Because
Don't fix what's not broken, man.
yeah, like life is already kind of good. It's not that I'm really like opposed to it, building out that kind of company. It's not really my specialty, so I would definitely need help doing that, from like we said. But it's just like, yeah, things are kind of good, and we enjoy what we're working on. And but yeah, I mean, I can't never say never. I can't rule it out for the future, but we'll see.
I got one more quick segment topic to close on. So I was hanging out with a friend of mine, Chris Serra. He has a company similar to mine, but more like in the Python space, specializing in a lot of healthcare stuff here in Philly. It's called ArcWeb. And he was telling me his Richard Stallman story, where he met Richard Stallman at a conference. And it got me thinking. Him and I were having drinks the other day at a club. We were like kind of talking about the history of software and how, like, if it wasn't for some of these early people like Stallman, would we have an open source, community? Like, would we have like a concept of open source? Like, would the Laravels and nodes and Reacts and TensorFlows of the world exist the way they do? If Stallman didn't do what he did. So I'll tell the quick Stallman story, then we can kind of talk about that conceptually. So
okay,
my friend Chris meets Stallman at a conference, goes up to him and says, "Hey Richard, my name's Chris. I'm a programmer from Philadelphia. I love your work. Can I shake your hand?" And he goes, "Sure, shake it." And he just holds his hand up like this, and then my friend Chris just goes, "Okay," and then just does one of these.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, he seems like kind of an eccentric guy for sure.
But yeah, I mean, it's crazy though. Like, imagine if that crew, like back at the 70s and 80s, didn't do what they did with the free software movement. How would it be different today?
Oh gosh, I mean, who knows? It's I think it's crazy how impactful that was, and I wonder if they really, I don't know if Stallman considers, himself like successful in that way or not, but it's crazy how much the world was impacted by that. And people rarely kind of think about it, like it could have been very different, but open source sort of like powers the world in many in many ways these days. So yeah, it's pretty wild. And, I just wonder how like cognizant they are of how successful that they see themselves, because some of those guys like Stallman is so hardcore about free software. The way, I don't know if you've read about like how he runs his laptop or like how he uses the internet and stuff. So
he's like a Faraday cage or something for his phone.
Yeah, pretty much. But basically the foundation they laid, it really changed the entire world. So I hope they do see it as successcul.
I'm curious too, because he's really hard on himself with that. Like, like all or nothing.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And certainly I look up to all those people as sort of paving the way for what was possible for us, and and thankful for what they contributed.
Because what's the alternative back then? I mean, you had Gates and you had, Jobs and Wozniak, and like these guys in their own rights, like did some really amazing stuff and, kind of paved the way for a lot of things themselves. But none of them had any component back then that was making what they were creating open. It was all just like, it was like very much a capitalist mindset for what they were doing, which, it has it's all pros and cons. I think there's a time and a place for both, and like we have a good blend of the two nowadays, which is cool. It's like, I like how a lot of the underlying technologies that have been built on over layers over decades are mostly open. Like the lower levels are mostly open source, and then it's like just the top layer that we sell is what the businesses are built on.
Right. Yeah, it's like all the operating systems and programming languages and tooling is mainly free, that many of these crazy businesses like GitHub, Uber, Shopify, Spotify, all these things people use every day, all the foundations are open source, I'm sure, pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, Google, everything, it's all like everything's running on Linux, and GNU tool packages and like the networking stuff that's like built into the data centers. That's all open source, and the the infrastructure that the ISPs use, and all this stuff that's just like built up and up and up over time. It's just so amazing. So amazing to think like how important that was, and like we don't really talk about it anymore. We talk about like the more recent stuff, but like how important and critical those moments were. Anything you want to? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say there'd be way less options, way less innovation. If that foundation wasn't laid.
Absolutely. Anything you want to close on? Anything you want to plug for the Laravel ecosystem, or something you're working on, or before we close out?
Gosh. I would plug Laracon, but we've sold out. If you're still interested in Laracon, we do have a wait list up, so get on that. If you've never used Laravel before, check it out, laravel.com. We also have bootcamp.laravel.com, which is sort of our introduction to Laravel that walks you through building sort of like a little Twitter clone using Laravel. So check it out.
Cool. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's fun.